What do you think are some of the big goals and some of the big things that need to be achieved at some of these summits right now, where you're trying to build what's being called multilateral reciprocal platforms in an economic sense, sir?
I think the most important goal of these events is, in my view, strengthening of the intra-ASEAN countries' solidarity, cohesion, and cooperation, and also enhance ASEAN countries' economic cooperation and bond or ties with other countries, in particular China.
Right. When you talk about what's happened over the last couple of months, and again, this also happens against the backdrop of this rising protectionism, a lot of the strong rhetoric coming out of Washington, D.C. with regards to tariffs. It seems to have calmed down a little bit over the last couple of weeks, but I think people are worried that perhaps the damage has already been done. Are we still in for a global economic slowdown from the viewpoint, at least, of the AIIB?
I think probably somewhat the economies or global economy will slow down a little bit. But this is sufficiently a warning to all of these countries involved that nobody would emerge successful from the war of tariffs. And I think more and more people came to understand this. And that is why you see in the US-China recently had an agreement. And the 90-day is certainly very much valuable time, but 90-day is not long enough. So they should try their very best to seek a permanent solution. And I think the US-China negotiation and the outcome also indicates that when people sit down and discuss the issues in a serene and calm manner, problems could be hopefully solved. So ASEAN countries facing the external shock certainly understand how important it is for ASEAN countries to work together among themselves and with the rest of the world.
Now, over the last couple of weeks, a lot of discussion has been around a possible U.S. economic slowdown because this tariff war is said to possibly be damaging, at least, to the U.S. economy. But perhaps not a lot has been talked about with regards to the impact on the Chinese economy. As we mentioned, a trade war will hurt both sides regardless of what happens at the moment. Is there a concern now of possible second-order effects impacting the Asian region from a Chinese economic slowdown? And is that something that perhaps needs to be also discussed at these particular talks?
I think in the run-up to the ASEAN summit, and over the last couple of months, ASEAN countries, China and others are already braced for a very tough time. The geopolitical wind has been shifting, and for the last couple of months already, the countries are preparing for Plan B, and they cannot just follow the traditional pattern of trade relations and investment. So they have to reconsider the approach. With regard to slowing down of the U.S. economy, there are obvious signs. And if the policies adjusted somewhat, probably they can reverse the trend. If not, and if the war of tariff continues, it will be very much damaging for the U.S. economy. Certainly, it will be having impact on the Chinese economy or the ASEAN countries. But you see, China has already been doing a lot of things to stimulate domestic economy, stimulate consumption, and also encourage the private sector to invest more and to be more innovative. So countries are prepared.
Now, as these countries start to talk, I've also noticed, Mr. Jin, that there's also been a growing importance or perhaps interest now in perhaps weaning off trading systems from the U.S. dollar and perhaps using other currencies like the yuan and others. And this has been perhaps gaining steam among many countries in ASEAN, China, and other parts. From the AIIB's point of view, is this actually going to be a good thing for economies perhaps to be less dependent or less connected to the concentration risk of being so dependent on the U.S. dollar, especially in this backdrop now?
You see, if we look at the history over the last 7 decades, ever since the end of the Second World War, you see the economic situation certainly has always been changing, and the relative economic strength of different countries will also change. That is why, for instance, after the Second World War, the US dollar became the main dominant international reserve currency. But regardless of what's happening, I think the developing countries' relative strength is also increasing. Okay, and so it's quite natural for some other emerging market economies, currencies would play a more important role relative to their trade volumes increase. So it's quite a natural, I would say, economic course of development.
Now, in terms of weaning themselves off of the possible risks of that volatile dollar, is this going to be helpful as well?
Certainly, people try to avoid risks, and they try to find what is the best way in their economic dealings with the rest of the world. For instance, what kind of currency would be safe, and would it be mostly, I think, helpful. So you see recently RMB has been playing a greater role along with the Chinese economics growth. So I would think it's quite natural, and it depends on each and every country's domestic strategy to deal with the shifting situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking of shifting situations, over the last couple of days, everyone in the financial markets have been a bit concerned, or perhaps interested actually, in the recent downgrading, at least, of the U.S. sovereign credit rating to double. They're still in sovereign investment grade, but still down from the AAA club at the moment. It's always interesting and always curious to see how groups like the AIIB actually react to this, because it does create perhaps unwanted volatility in terms of financing activities and interest rate volatility. What are your thoughts on what's happened, and whether or not it's going to make your job a bit more challenging, actually, at the AIIB?
I think the downgrade of U.S. sovereign rating would definitely increase the cost of U.S. borrowings. U.S. borrowings is very much important because of the high level debt. So direct impact is on the U.S. certainly. And with regard to the impact on the rest of the world, I think probably it's minimal. And as you know, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank has the dollar as the main currency. Okay. On the other hand, because of the demand of our borrowing countries, we also issue bonds in local currency. We provide local currency financing for our members. And also, we need to set up our benchmark in the global dollar market, in China panda bond market, in euro market. So our actual management of the currency is pretty diversified. But what is most important is for us to respond to the needs of our members. If they need local currency, we give this to them.